the communications world, 5G is on everybody's lips. But will the 5G reality match the 5G hype? Today I'm talking to Professor William Webb to find out some more. Good morning, William. You work for many organisations in the regulatory, radio spectrum and wireless and IoT space, including mobile network operators and regulators around the world. I know you completed a study on 5G for Ofcom and wrote the book, The 5G Myth. You ought to know what you're talking about then, but the great thing I like about talking to you is that you seem immune to the commercial imperative. Where tech's concerned, you tell it like it is. This was a good example recently. As part of Incisors expert group, you ended a commentary story on current industry developments by saying, in relation to 5G, what's happening in mobile comms at the moment is the loud telling of a story that's more fiction than fact. So let's get into this. Is 5G more smoke and mirrors than it is a commercial reality or opportunity? Is there a gulf between the way that the industry is pitching 5G, its capabilities, its role and so on, and in what it will be in reality?
Yes, absolutely. There's a huge gap. And in particular, the gap resides around the people who say that 5G is going to be transformative. It's going to change the world. It's going to be a generation like no other. It's going to make a huge difference to the way that we live. Unfortunately, none of those things are really true. 5G is just another generation. It's slightly better than 4G. It will bring about a bit more capacity into the networks. It won't materially change the way that we use them. And I think that's the big problem with 5G. It's being pitched as being somehow much, much better than just another generation. But in practice, that's what it actually is.
Okay, well, do you think that the industry, the mobile network operators, the infrastructure companies and so on, do they have the resources and the will to roll out 5G in the way that they're presenting? In other words, can the industry afford 5G?
I think you've got the point, you've hit the nail right on the head with the last point. Industry can't afford 5G. And you can see that fairly simplistically in that the assumption is that there will not be any improvement in revenues from deploying 5G. You and I as consumers won't pay any more for a 5G subscription than we pay for 4G. And yet the operators have to spend money on new equipment. That clearly isn't a very good business case. No new revenue, but more spending. And the operators themselves are typically in a fairly cash-constrained situation. We saw quite recently Vodafone announcing a significant cut in dividends. We've seen many operators in a situation where their returns to their investment backers are much lower than could be got elsewhere. So most of the operators are actually pretty keen not to spend a lot of money, and as a result will not be deploying 5G fairly quickly. In fact, they'll roll it out really quite slowly, probably over a 5 to 10 year period. And that means that we won't see any kind of big bang 5G. It'll be a very gradual, slow process. In terms of resources, if they threw the money at it, they probably could find enough resources. But actually, I don't think they'll do that.
Okay, then, well, that causes a problem, doesn't it? Because successful 5G is seen as essential in order to underpin some industry developments. I'm thinking a lot of the Internet of Things, for example, and specifically autonomous driving cars. Are the companies that are betting the farm on their future in these areas right to put so much reliance on 5G?
So actually, I'm not sure that those companies are putting much reliance on 5G. I think the message that 5G is essential for those kind of sectors, as you said, the manufacturing, the automotive, and so on, is one that has come from the mobile community and not from the sector itself. By and large, the sectors are doing just fine, thank you. And automotive is a case in point. There are no car companies that I know of that are jumping up and down saying, please, 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 can we have 5G because it's essential to our forward plans. Instead, they're saying, well, we're doing just fine. We're testing autonomous cars with what we currently have. If you come along with better connectivity, then sure, we'll consider it. But it's not something that we absolutely have to have. And in terms of the manufacturing and the IoT side of things, actually, we already have good IoT solutions. On the mobile side, they are available now within 4G. They're called things like NB-IoT. There are also self-deployed solutions, LoRa, Waitlist, and others that people can use to go ahead and do things. And in fact, it's not the availability of the wireless solution that's constraining that space. It's just the complexity of building complete overall end-to-end solutions for each different vertical that's slowing us down there. So I don't think the end users have got any particular problems there. I think the problems will come within the telecoms industry, who are hoping that somehow these sectors will need their services, and assuming that there might be some kind of revenue uptick as a result. And I don't think they'll see that revenue uptick.
Well, okay, then for any given country, for us in the UK, for example, is national success in 5G important? I mean, should we be concerned about this? Should we be concerned about current issues brewing between the US and China, for example?
So what we hear from a lot of countries is the politicians particularly saying we must be leaders in 5G. And they typically don't explain why they need to be, but there's this assumption that actually 5G is going to be so important for future communications that somehow you have to be a significant player in that. But actually, of course, there can only be one global leader, and there are 200 countries, so not everyone can be that leader. But more particularly, if 5G is not transformative, then there's no real need to be the leader. And actually, I'm a great fan of the concept that it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. The first person to deploy 5G will discover all the problems with the standards and the solutions that need to be worked through. And that will be costly and might require a lot of equipment replacement. And then that leaves it for others to come along and deploy in a much simpler, quicker move. Of course, we are seeing now a question around whether the world will be using Huawei's equipment for 5G or not. And it's generally thought that Huawei is somewhat ahead of the other suppliers. So if we see some kind of restriction around Chinese vendors, as seems to be the way that things are unfolding at the moment, then that would potentially slow down the deployment of 5G. But I don't think it materially changes things. We don't need 5G to be rushed into production and into development and deployment. So nothing to worry about too much there. And I think countries should be less concerned about whether they are going to be global leaders in 5G and looking more at what the overall communications infrastructure they need in their country actually is, and whether that's really 5G or whether that's a combination of 4G and Wi-Fi and other things that go together to add up to something that's much more useful.
Just thinking about this, if Huawei was forced to step back in its 5G rollout, is the rest of the world sufficiently ready to be able to step in and fill the void, or would 5G overall be held back?
So the key competitors to Huawei on the infrastructure side are Nokia and Ericsson. They do have 5G solutions, and I'm sure that they continue to work hard on those. If they had to ramp up the volumes, I suspect that's not particularly difficult. That's simply a case of sending bigger orders to the factories to keep building more of these kind of things. So I don't think it makes a big difference. The industry there might be somewhat concerned if there are only two vendors now, that they're moving to a world where they don't have a nice vibrant supply chain that's innovative and able to come up with different solutions and exert good cost pressures on the systems. And also it might be an opportunity for Ericsson's and Nokia's to effectively keep their prices slightly higher. So it might make the economics of 5G somewhat worse. And as we've already talked about, the economics don't look great anyway. So that may constrain the spread of rollout if the prices are not pushed down by vibrant competition.
Okay, let's wrap up by asking you the sort of ultimate blue skies question. In your opinion, Professor William Webb, what is the future for 5G?
So 5G is being deployed by mobile operators to provide capacity enhancement on the cells that are most congested, which are the ones in city centres. And we'll see that continue because that's the cheapest, simplest way to get more capacity into the network, to use the spectrum that comes with 5G and the somewhat enhanced spectral efficiency of 5G to deliver more capacity. And that, to my mind, is going to be the future of 5G, at least for the next 4 or 5 years. It will be deployed across 20, 30% of the network, maybe in those areas where there's the most congestion. And it will just deliver more capacity. That, of course, is a good thing to consumers, but it won't deliver anything that's particularly materially different in terms of the benefits that they get from their mobile phones. Beyond that, it's rather difficult to really forecast, but my view is actually, I think the capacity demands will start to level off at that point as consumers get somewhat satiated by what they can do on their mobile phones, and therefore it won't be necessary to roll 5G out much further. And it'll stay as essentially a high capacity urban area solution for much of the next decade.
Well, William, you and I talk on a regular basis and have done for quite a long time. I look forward to revisiting this in a few years' time and seeing where it did all go. Thanks very much this morning, William.
You're very welcome, Vince.